So, on the whole, I don't know, it's tough. Like, when you look at BRIC, it's very much like you do have to kind of look at them separately, and it's tough to look at one and say this is a case study for all four because they really do all have their own problems. Specifically, if you look at Russia, like as what was talking about, Russia really has all of its service eggs in one energy basket, and that needs to be apparently diversified, for both greater safety and, higher employment. And then Danny is talking about, at the same time, like, basically the same situation except for they're dependent on agricultural imports. So one is something that needs to be done from, the inside out, like diversify more jobs internally, and one is something that needs to be cut out, like from external by creating more agriculture. But in both ways, it's really fundamentally it's an imbalance. And then if you look at India, which is really there's not much argument. Maybe China gives contest, but India is probably the most successful BRIC nation, at least in terms of the right now. Once you factor in everything. And so, in Zakaria's book, China has a higher growth rate, I understand that, but they're not successful, at least not from
a lower poverty level.
But they have communist government. So, it's the choice between living...
I guess, the basic difference is that China has a more centralized, more state-operated enterprises, whereas India has a more flourishing private sector.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, if you take into account the issue of freedom of speech and stuff like that, that actually is changing although the government of China is resisting, it's actually changing within China. But if you look at the independence within each individual in China, they're actually better off per capita than in India in terms of being economically dependent, in terms of having a more secure job and such. And it's actually increasing at a faster rate. That is, the GDP, the income in China is actually increasing at a faster rate than in India.
Yeah, the GDP is increasing faster.
But per capita.
Yeah.
Too. And so people are making more money.
Okay. Let me put it this way. If I were forced to move to a BRICS nation, I would move to India. So obviously, yeah, that is skewed by my viewpoint because I would have the greatest chance at a standard of living comparable to what I have here, or even the same or better. And at the same time, I wouldn't have every little thing I said under a microscope. I'd be able to go to Google without finding that I couldn't, and that sort of business. But the point I was originally going to make. So when Zakaria wrote this book, it was basically a 50-20, like India's GDP was composed of 50% services, 25% industry, and 25% agriculture, like we talked about. But now, according to the CIO World Facts book, its services are 62.5%, its industry is 20%, and its agriculture is 17.5%. So industry is sliding down a little bit, agriculture is being heavily slid down, and services are going way up. And it's a diversification of services. It isn't like everybody's going to work, in the energy sector like would be happening in Russia. And that's the diversity that's creating growth. And like when you look at it, initially India was in the same situation as Brazil with its post-colonial legacy until Indira and the Green Revolution, is my understanding. And so that at that point agriculture was down, and then it shot way up as they, worked on having their own system of agriculture so they would wean off dependency of foreign nations. But then now it's coming back down again, which is creating this, growth. And is it sustainable? Probably for, at least another 10, 15 years. I don't think agriculture can really come down too much lower, though, or they're going to go back into being in the same boat as Brazil and focusing too heavily on imports. And you guys have prognosis for 10 to 15 years in advance of you guys'?
Well, I think Russia really needs it. A lot of the wealth is concentrated within what they call oligarchs, and those are really just basically people that are groups that have the power, the concentration, and that really needs to change in Russia. In order for right now, that hasn't changed as much. The Russian government has said that it will try to increase the diversification of its economy, but the wealth needs to be spread around more within Russia so that more people have opportunities, more jobs can be created. Because right now it's really just concentrated. They're the ones making the decisions, and really they care a lot less about the individual, normal citizen than should be the case. And they really have a lot of power within the government too, and so that really needs to change. And so right now it doesn't seem like that's happening, but that could change within the next few years.
I think for China to progress at either the same rate or a higher rate, it needs to kind of understand some of the most central conflicts which kind of plagues it right now. One of which is the deterioration of its environment due to, just mass industrialization, notably air pollution, soil erosion. Essentially, it's losing, arable land, which is, it's not beneficial at all, I guess. So it needs to work on that.
All right, quickly, Brazil in the next 10 to 15 years in the next 10 to 15 years